this is now the steps you need to take to be able to install this pod filter. So originally it has the air box. I don't have the lid, that's at a mate's house, but this is the original air box that you need to first remove from the car, which usually sits around there, which lines up with these three bolts. One's under the pod filter, one's there. A bit dodgy bolts because old car been sitting there a while. Usually sits in here around like that. So you have several options in getting a pod filter. You have different intake pipes. This is suitable for the VS Commodore. These are the cheapest pod filters. These are smaller sort of pod filters. They're maybe not the best to use. We have different intake pipes like this, and got all kinds of things you can play around with. Has zip ties to hold it in. Here you have more intake pipes. These are silicone. They're good, but they're not exactly recommended because silicone can expand when heated, so that can be somewhat of an issue because it doesn't seal around the pod filter properly, which can have your issues. So for a average PE plater or whoever you are, easy mod is just grab silicone hose. That's the size, chuck it in there, but it's not exactly the best thing to do. And here we have the perfect tools for what we need. So for this you would need a flathead screwdriver. You need the larger ones for the pod filter. So like this sort of set here, 12 piece screwdriver set. And for the zip ties, get some side cutters so you don't accidentally cut something you're not meant to. So that's kind of going over this. So I'll put the average price on up here. Average price. Okay, so to carry out the first step, you will need a 10mm socket to remove the bolts off of the air box, which should be an easy job. If the bolts are C's, you would need WD-40, which should carry in your car anyway, just in case of any seized parts from when you get your car. With this socket, you actually need to get underneath the car to be able to loosen it off. So we're getting underneath the car, you need to have a look at where the bolts are located. First, put your hand under to feel for where the bolt sits. And place it on the bolt to unscrew it, and then you need a spanner from the other side to hold it in there. Make sure it's tight on the other side so you can loosen it up well, which is a job you might want to do with a mate, just because it's awkward to hold a spanner under the car while trying to loosen a bolt. With these pod filters, it's recommended you get a new one, obviously, because this one's pretty munted, and I'm just showing it so I can give a good description of how to install an actual pod filter. With the pod filters is you need to make sure you have your MAF sensor connected, which is the airflow sensor, which tells you, you know, what temperature the air is. If those aren't connected, then your engine just simply can't connect to the computer, and it always finds an issue with your engine, which you don't want because your car will then not be drivable. With these pod filters, you need to make sure that the pipe only sits to where that little lip, you might be able to see it on the camera, might not, there's a little lip in there. You can make sure the intake pipe just sits on the lip so that it's not blocking any of the filtration parts of the filter, so the air can get, actually get into the filter and not be blocked. So when actually installing your pod filter, you need to take into account where your actual original air box was so that you can get the maximum airflow into the filter. So mine was located here. So the maximum airflow where the air comes in is located around the radiator liquid, and that is definitely a problem with most old Holdens, is the windscreen wiper fluid is in the way of where most of your modifications to your engine goes. So the best location for these pod filters is right where the hole of your old stock intake is, so it can get the air straight into the filter. And there's different ways you can put in these filters, which depends on where everything is located in your car. This is a smaller one than both of these, which helps it actually fit into the engine bay a lot better. You can get curved ones, so if your air box is located more over in this direction, you can curve it with this, and that helps it fit in there a lot better than trying to bend around with this pipe over there, and it just doesn't work like that because these pipes need to be out straight so it can get, once the air goes into your filter, it can go straight in and there's none of these notches blocking it, or it's not getting squished by anything. So that is also really important when installing the filter. Once you have the location sorted of where you're going to put your filter, next step is to unpack the filter, and you just need a flathead screwdriver. Can be any type, any size, and you would need to start unscrewing the pod filter until it gets loose enough to be able to move. Once you can start moving it, has a little bit of, it's a bit loose, you need to then grab your intake pipe, and you shouldn't need any force to be able to put it in. So if you need to force it in, just loosen it off a bit more. These filters with the adaptions for different size intake hoses can be a little bit tricky, so when getting these, you may need to lift up the first lip a bit more so that you can actually fit in the intake pipe, and then you need to place it in, get it nice and snug, which it is now. Make sure there's no cracks and holes between the pipe and where that adaptation is. And you need to tighten it up and hold it in the right spot. Also, try and get a mate to do this part as well, because it can be a bit fiddly. So maybe just get some help to make sure it's in straight, because any little tiny cracks in there can release air, which is not the purpose of this filter. Once it's in there correctly, which it's in there now, nice and firm, just see if there's any wobbles, which there isn't, so it's in there correctly, tightened. Now it's time to install it into the engine. These pipes can definitely be a bit long, so it will actually touch the end of your engine bay with these VS Commodores. So with the MAF sensors, you need to first grab your screwdriver. You need to undo this hose clamp in here and take this end of the hosing off, so that then you can fit in the end of your intake pipe. And there's a little filter which is already in here just to stop anything that gets past your filter that's small enough to get through, but it will be blocked by this. The reason why you don't want stuff going through your filter is because It can clog your engine, it can do bad things for the engine. It's just not good for the car altogether. Once it is in, once you've put the intake pipe in, close the hoses, make sure that the filter is not wobbling around, which then you may need a filter bracket, which you just need to put in the hole that your original airbox was in with its bolt. Tyres are recommended just because they're easy to put in and it gets it nice and firm so it's not wobbling around in there. And this is the outcome of mine, which I put in there, which was same process. A few more additions which you can help with the airflow of the pod filter, and this is commonly just called a pod filter heat shield, which you can get off of the K&N website, which is the company of the pod filters, the performance filters, and these help the airflow get into the pod filter and the heat from the engine get blocked at the end of the heat shield so that it's not exposed to hot air. As if you don't have one of these, the heat shield, it's a risk to actually suck the hot air from the engine back into the filter, back into your engine. This is a problem because hot air in your engine can overheat your engine, which can cause many problems. Engine breaking down, overheating, you know, chances of a fire under your hood, which you definitely don't want. The next step is to test if it's installed properly, and you can notice this by whether you get a check engine light in your car or not. So the obvious way to check if it's in properly is to actually start up the car and go from there. So wait for the fuel injectors to start with these cars. And so you can hear an intense sucking noise coming from your engine. That's just because your car's getting used to the new filter, and it's also because it changes the sound of your engine, so it's a lot louder, so you can actually notice some of the noises in the car more properly. You can see the pod filter shaking, which means it's sucking in that air. And the next step, once you start it up, on all your warning lights. The warning check engine light should be around here, and if that's off, then you've installed it properly and your engine recognises that there's a filter in there and that there's nothing obscuring your engine. Enjoy and drive safe.